So as we start looking into different research methodologies and how they're tied to the concept of a way of knowing, um, it's important to consider some various contexts and just the nature of how we know things. So um, first of all, it seems in our society, we depend on quote unquote experts for letting us know what to know, and it's really interesting to think about. I've been thinking of examples of how do I know things that aren't related to my profession, and um, one recent example is how to fix a carburetor. Yeah. I learned something about that recently, and how do I now know that? I actually know that from working with a friend on a tailgate of a Ford truck, um, and taking apart the carburetor and seeing all the parts and seeing how it all went back together. So now I know something, and it's not from a formal research process. And there are a multitude examples of how we might know things. Um, am I going to give advice on how to build a carburetor based on that? Nah, I'm not going to do that. But I did learn something, and it's valuable, and it's something I'll remember, and it's something I'll build upon. So it's always good to continue to think about the ways in which we know things. Probably, one of the hardest ways for some people to reconcile, I suppose, is spirituality. Some people would say they know because of their spiritual experiences, and other people don't believe that at all. So it's probably one of the biggest divides in various ways of knowing. It's also very important to understand or consider indigenous ways of knowing, which are sometimes very much different than how Western people perceive the world, and that it's important to know and to learn about. It's really not something we focus on a lot in this course, but it is something that I always want students to be aware of. And specific to the scientific method, depending on how it's applied, there are ways it fits into an indigenous way of knowing, and some ways it doesn't fit in at all. So considering those issues are important. So getting specific to our field and the breaking things up into a dichotomy of quantitative and qualitative research. I consider myself a multi-methodologist, and feel like I'm relatively knowledgeable of both lines of inquiry, and I'm glad that I've maintained an open mind and continue to learn from both paradigms. My experience going to the University of Oregon, where in the College of Education historically had been very anti-qualitative research, and I decided to do a qualitative research project. I don't know how, in retrospect, how smart that was. Probably created me some challenges I didn't necessarily need, but it was a good process. And but just to give you some context, I mean, there were only a few people there at the time. I think it's changed a little now, who did qualitative research that you could even work with. So that was a fun and exciting process, but it kind of highlights how dogmatic some people can be, and for that matter, some universities in general. I would say here, it's exactly at the University of Montana, it's the opposite, where most people are engaged in qualitative research. So why does that matter? And maybe it matters to some people and to others it doesn't matter. But ultimately, we should be thinking about the question that we want to answer, and selecting our methodology based on that. Unfortunately, some people don't think qualitative research is a good way to answer any questions. Same with quantitative research. But I'll provide some examples here of ethnography, which you'll read about in the text a little later, is just a great methodology from which we've learned a lot about other cultures. And without it, the world simply would not be the same. And that's not to say there haven't been negative things, especially doing ethnographic work in indigenous cultures. There have been negative things come out of that. But in many ways, we've gained invaluable knowledge about the world, cultures, societies, genders, on and on through ethnographic research, which is a qualitative methodology. And it's very much focused on observation and very much dependent on, if you will, open-endedness. So those are two concepts I want to spend a minute on, is observation and instruments. So observation, so if you look up the definition, which you did, of empiricism, at least one definition of empiricism is roughly things we know through direct observation. And it's really interesting, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, of observing something, and then what do we do? In qualitative research, you'll learn, the researcher is considered the instrument. Okay? In quantitative research, you usually have an instrument or a checklist that you're scoring, usually kind of a scoring approach. So, the whole notion of observing is similar, but it's how it's recorded. And it's largely about trusting the researcher, And we could go on and on about ways that maybe we should or maybe we shouldn't trust qualitative researchers, or maybe there's reasons we shouldn't trust quantitative researchers. There's always trust issues, and that is ethics, which is another topic. But there are always those issues. So we have that empiricism and observation, but also within the different methodologies, qualitative is generally more, open-ended, and the questioning is open-ended. So, you often approach questions as, tell me about your daily routine. Just one example. And someone can spend some time describing their daily routine. From that, you get rich and detailed description, and that provides context. In a quantitative framework, you might say, and I'm saying this off the top of my head, so forgive my immediate scale development here. Would you describe your morning routine as rigid, flexible, or somewhere in between, right? So you provide basically a scale from which someone chooses. So just think about that for a minute. A description of someone's routine that could go on for a half hour, if not managed, or a 1 second response where they check a box, okay? I'm really not being critical of either approach, but what's the purpose of your research? Do you want to know generally about people's routines, a certain demographic, or are you trying to learn based on like an average morning routine for people who fit a demographic? So that's why it's important to keep an open mind about methodology as you move through the process of selecting an issue or a topic that you want to research. Okay, so those are some big concepts related to qualitative and quantitative research that kind of makes them distinctly different. So I look forward to watching as you develop here in your knowledge of how you select a methodology based on the issue you want to research.